for joining us. As you've just alluded to, Daniel, it's not the easiest of times, is it? Lots going on in everybody's lives and different circumstances in school and what have you. So thank you ever so much for taking the time to join us tonight. So we've got from 3:30 till 4:30, looking at EYFS, PE and physical development. So quick introduction. I'm Kristina Scott, and I work part-time at Nether Green Infants towards the end of the week, and then I also work for Shape Learning Partnership, which is the school sport partnership in Derbyshire, and I'm a tutor as well for Create Development, who do real PE. So quite my day is usually about 10,000 Zoom calls a day, trying to juggle everybody and everything. So I teach mainly in reception. I've been teaching for too many years to say, and then I started doing a lot of work for the School Sport Partnership about 6 or 7 years ago. So I now sort of do the two together. So we're going to have a look this afternoon at EYFS PE and physical development. I've tried to include some time for people to join in through the chat function. A really good turnout so far with the number of people who have signed up for this and who are attending. So it will be more difficult to have time to actually flip from one person to another, but there will be chance for you to join in through the chat function as well. And then obviously if anybody wants to stay on the end, you know, can do a bit more face-to-face chat. Brilliant. So just the hard technical part. I'm going to try and share screen. And then start the slideshow. Okay, so just a very, very quick overview, just hopefully by the end of the webinar, so that we all know what it's about, where it's going. Hopefully to start with a bit of understanding about the research behind the importance of physical activity, in particular for the development of the whole child in the early years setting. When you unpick that, there's quite a lot in there in terms of developing, not just developing a child's physical skills, but the whole child through the early years curriculum. And as it says, the importance of physical activity through whatever shape or form that might be. We will then have a look at, to start with, we'll look at physical development, just touching on some milestones, some processes that children in the early years go through in terms of their early years physical development. And then we'll move on to how that physical development can be separated, if you like, and I find it's easier for us as practitioners to think of it in these separate terms when you're trying to address the provision that you're trying to make sure that you've got through in your setting. So looking at physical education as well as physical activity. And I've tried to put in ideas and resources to support you in school there. Touching on active learning as well, another opportunity to be physical and creative. And then I suppose more important than ever before, mental well-being linked to physical activity as well. So they're the things that we're going to touch on. Okay, so before I launched into, I think my head is probably as full as Adam's with resources, ideas, oh, I could give you this, could give you that. I thought really we need to have a look at the starting point in terms of where are we now, and the first part of that journey really, if we are trying to embed a successful EYFS curriculum, then I think we have to understand that we're all at very different starting points, different phases along that journey. We've all got different school staff that we work with. The cohort of children that you have will be different from every single school, and the environment, the physical environment that you have got in order to share and develop that curriculum approach will be different from school to school. So really it was just to say as a starting point to bear all of that in mind, some of the things that I share with you today, some of the things that we talk about may be really very relevant for you in your setting, in your school. Other things you might think that's just not going to work in our school. So it's just bearing in mind that we're all coming from different starting points. Some people, in terms of their physical development provision, will be very far on in that journey. Other people will be just starting out, trying to address what does our curriculum look like in terms of physical development. So again, I've tried to cover all bases, and hopefully there will be a bit of something for everybody today, despite the different starting points that we all come from. And then the second thing, really, how can we create an effective EYFS PE or physical development provision? And I thought, again, as a starting point, it was important to go through the process of implementing something like that, something as big and as broad as your full physical development provision. The first three in the list, understanding the need, staff confidence and competence, and also pupil engagement and enjoyment, were three things in that process that I thought it was important to start this webinar by having a look and really just being a bit thought-provoking for everybody involved this afternoon. If we understand the need to do something, we're more likely, A, to do it, and B, to be more successful at it. Sometimes it might be that the people who are here now are the champions for their PE and physical development provision. So it's important as well that the whole staff understand the need behind making sure that our provision is effective. So I'll talk a little bit more about the understanding the need part. Staff confidence, and it should say competence. Again, we are all coming from different starting points. Some people are very competent and confident in terms of PE provision, or in terms of trying new ideas with physical active learning, that sort of thing. Other staff, it might be that you, if you are PE coordinators with us this afternoon, it might be that you're best placed to identify. Potentially there may be some staff that need some support in that area, or that you could work with and work alongside. Hopefully as well, through the things that I've put together in this PowerPoint, I hope that will help you as well. If you are feeling a little bit less confident, then I hope through this afternoon we'll work to raise that confidence level in you as well. And then lastly, the reason that we do it all for the pupils themselves, and I always, no matter what the subject is when I'm doing a lot of my consultancy work, I always try to say to the members of staff that I work with, it is about, we do all of this because we want to make sure that our provision is effective for the young people that we work with. So it's just about addressing, in terms of your EYFS provision, how engaged are your pupils and how much enjoyment do they currently get through opportunities to be active, or through PE lessons and physical activity sessions as well. I've just then put underneath in brackets, if you're not sure on any of those things, it might be that you're not the one at the helm who kind of already knows it all with the PE provision. Just conducting an audit of need, so just finding out what the understanding is with your staff, and sometimes just stepping back and observing pupils when they are active in EYFS, just to see actually what are they getting out of it, what levels of enjoyment and engagement are there. So then at the end I've put resources and ideas. Everybody always wants more resources, more ideas, so I've tried to include lots of that. And then sharing and learning from each other. I really value that, and I just think if we can give some opportunity today for people to share ideas, no matter how long I've been doing this job for, there are still times when I will see other teachers teaching and working and think, wow, I never thought to do it like that. So I hope today will provide some more of those opportunities for you to share ideas as well. Okay, so I said we'd start with understanding the need. So I've just started with a few key facts. the one that most people are aware of, young children should take part in at least 60 minutes of physical activity every day. And I have put in bold at least. It isn't a case of they should take part in 60 minutes. That's the minimum requirement. And it should be up to 3 hours. There is a little bit of stat info a bit later in the presentation, which Adam actually shared with you on the previous cluster meeting that we had, regarding some of those figures and what the actual take up of physical activity each day is in our young children at the moment. Nearly a third of 2 to 16-year-old children are currently classed as clinically obese. Children with poor fundamental movement skills are probably and definitely proven to be more likely to become inactive in adulthood. I have been very lucky when I've been to conferences over the last few years through my consultancy role to be involved in quite a lot of the research side of children's physical development and activity levels. And as it says in there, it has been proven time and time again that children with poorer fundamental movement skills are more likely to lead an inactive life. So when we talk about longevity and lifelong learning, we need to make sure in the early years that we're getting that right, so that can be followed on and carried through primary education. And then finally, I suppose very apt right now is physical and mental health have already been shown to have deteriorated dramatically during the pandemic. I'm sure I don't need to print out and show you loads of different facts, and there's so much in the news, on Twitter feeds at the moment, in social media, about the effects of both the physical decline and the mental health decline as well. So just some things to start us to think, actually, why is it important? Why have I given up an hour of my Wednesday evening to address this? Actually, some of those things there, when we think of the children that we look after, are huge and immense. And they're the things that we can start to have an impact upon. Okay, so I'm rubbish at chat functions, but I'm going to give it a go. So just having a think of, I'm sure lots of people are aware currently that physical activity does enhance brain function. So I know some people might have seen this before. So this is a brain scan of 20 students after taking the same test. The one on the left was after the children had sat quietly, and the one on the right was after a 20-minute walk. The reds and the yellows show high levels of brain activity after taking part in physical activity. So just a little, if you would like to have a go, at the top it says, at birth, the brain is what percentage of its adult size? And Adam, would you mind keeping an eye on the chat for me? Is that okay? Maybe just read out 2 or 3 or 4 as they come in. If people want to put it in the chat function, what percentage do you think it is?
Joe says 50% question mark. I'm glad I'm reading it out because it means I don't have to answer it then. Daniel Abbott says 30% at birth. Question mark. 70, 25, 60. Three years, 75. 40%, 40%. Giving people a chance to Google it now, aren't we?
Yeah, we'll stop there. So at birth, the brain is 30% of its adult size already. And then by 3 years old, people want to have another guess. That's kind of helped you a bit. By 3, what percentage do people think?
Got a couple 60s and a 70. 70. 70 to 80. 90 from Miss Whitaker. 75.
Good guesses. Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you, Adam. So it's actually 80% of its adult size by 3 years old. And I know I was quite kind of taken aback thinking, wow, by 3. And I suppose that leads us on to that whilst physical activity can actually have some positive impact on brain growth, the fact that your brain is 80% of its adult size by 3, obviously the margins for increasing that are not as big as the margins for helping with brain development, but also brain functioning. So it says at the bottom, activity of any kind is proven to have a positive impact. Yes, it is on brain growth, but not as much as on brain development and on functioning as well. If you wanted to do a little test of your own, then you can do, there's some things online where, similar to the scan here as well, you can sit quietly for 20 minutes and complete a test. And actually a lot, in certain one of them, your scores can be quite starkly increased when you've done the same test after physical activity. But I won't bore you with all of those. It really, in particular, as I've put at the bottom, physical activity is proven to help the executive function when we think of brain functioning, and it's that part of the brain that we use for memory, we use it for planning, for adapting, it's relied on heavily for speech and language, but also for focus, for memory recall, for all the sorts of things that we're asking children, even in the early years, to start to use some of those. We're asking them memory recall facts, we're asking them to focus and maintain attention. So therefore, any type of physical activity is going to have a positive impact, not just on a child's physical health, not just on their mental health, but also their capacity for their brain to be functioning as best as it can do. So active pupils do perform better. There was so much research that I could have put in here, but I basically just tried to sum it up into the 4 most vital things for us as teachers and practitioners in the early years. Yes, it can have a really positive impact on behaviour, on brain function, in school engagement as well, but also in academic results. There is a wealth of research out there, particularly over the last 5 years. There has been more and more research into the effects of physical activity on brain development and on academic achievement in children. So if anybody is interested, there's a huge array of different things out there. But I think it's important for us to know and to understand that if we're asking children to sit still, to be quiet and to listen to us, then we're already detracting from what a child naturally needs, particularly in the early years, in order to achieve all of those 4 things on there. Okay, so I said we'd split it up into physical development, PE, physical activity, active learning. So the first one looks at physical development. So we turn our brains, if you like, to having a think about how the children that have come to us in the early years have actually started to develop physically. The main two parts of this are that a child's development will happen from the head down. So the brain, as we've just discovered, will be the organ to develop before everything else below it. And then development with children also happens from the centre outwards. I'm not going to read either of those 2 words out because I'm bound to say them wrong, but that's basically what it means. So the reason for me putting this in as well is that if we are wanting children in the early years to be able to do fine motor control, which they need for obviously writing, handwriting, but for knives and forks, for fastening things, for picking things up with pincer grips, then we need to know and to understand that actually a child's physical development happens from the centre outwards. So it is their gross motor skills that need to develop before we can refine their fine motor skills. So any organs and muscles in the centre of the body will develop first before we get to the extremities of the hands, which we use so much in education. So how can we facilitate physical development? Sorry. So we've looked at a little bit about why it's important, how it develops in children. And the first thing I thought when I was sort of trying to think how can I best support people to look at their physical development would be to look at the environment that you've got at school. So as I said at the beginning, it's very different in very different circumstances that you might teach, and some of you may be in early years settings where there is a wealth of provision and facilities. Others may be linked to a nursery, some might not be. Some of you may be in a reception classroom which is relatively small with not an array of activities and outdoor play areas and what have you. But no matter where you are coming from and where you're starting from, I've found when I've worked in early years settings before to try and support their physical development that we've looked at the three aspects of the early years curriculum. So we've looked at the unique child. So how are all of your children supported in terms of their physical development? And I know it's an easy question, but to actually address that and actually think, how do we support the children to develop physically? So we need them to develop for brain development, as we've just said. We need gross motor skills to have a real emphasis in the early years in order for us to be able to start to identify fine motor development as well. It's not something that necessarily you can answer today. It might be, these are questions really for you to think, how can we start to look at that? You might be thinking, yep, we support them really well. Again, we're all at different points. So this is just a thought-provoking opportunity, really. Positive relationships. So how effective are our interactions with children, but also with parents? Because we know through everything we do at school that parental role models and parental involvement has a huge impact on how our children present to us when they first come into the early years, or how they progress through primary education. So that you can have the most amazing facilities, you can have 10 million balls and beanbags and ribbons and everything else, but actually if your interactions with the children in the early years aren't effective, so they aren't well questioned, they aren't well timed and well paced, then actually that development of their physical skills is not going to be as effective. And then the third one in green is environment, enabling environment. So how is the environment supporting children to make good progress? And again, I know that we're all coming from different aspects when we think of our environment, but it's something that you personally could take away from today. And sometimes it's just stepping back and having a look and thinking, actually in the outdoor environment, how are we encouraging people to play? Or how are we encouraging physical activity? Or is our outdoor environment allowing more sedentary behaviours? Have we got a wealth of resources? Are there freebies that we could tap into? And the same for your classroom environment as well. I know, just a quick one for us at Nether Green, thanks to Adam and the things that they send, we trialed the standing desks. They were brilliant for early years when we don't want them all to be sat down at the tables. So sometimes it's just taking a step back and thinking, could I just try something? It might not work, but is it worth giving it a go? And then the three at the bottom, again, just things really for you to bear in mind as we go through this afternoon. If we reflect on our practice, then we're going to question the current provision. So it might be that you're new to a school and that's relatively easy for you to do. When I started at Nether Green Infants, it's quite easy as a new member of staff to come in and have a look at everything and start to think, oh, maybe we could have that, or I'd like to try this out. If you've been teaching at your school for a long time, maybe it's just thinking, right, if I could change anything, does anything need changing? That questioning of your current provision, and maybe even wish lists. I know that we can't all have all the resources that we want, but sometimes I've worked with a school just before in the autumn who they had a link with the local woodland, And when they were doing some of their felling, and they asked for the tree barks to be cut into slabs, and were they allowed them for free, and obviously they wanted to dispose of them. So that it's just things like that. Sometimes it's just thinking, what can I do? If I had a wish list, it's not necessarily picking up the YPO catalogue and going through there. I've done one with a local bike shop who let us have the cardboard boxes that a bike came in, which obviously were huge. And then we did loads of different things which allowed the children to be physical because of the nature. They were such massive boxes. They're just little things. So reflecting on practice, trying to develop our practice in terms of increasing the quality of what we provide, and then also establishing that practice, which is more long term. So having a look at how can I embed that, so we don't just plan a physical development opportunity, but actually it's cultural and it's happening every day in everything that we do with our children in early years, because we really value it. Okay. Whoops. So I suppose alongside that, when we've had a look at the environment that we're able to offer, it's then being aware that effective learning will only happen with the characteristics of effective learning when we know those. So how do we actually allow learning to take place if our environment is established how we want it to be? So I've just split those into some of the key characteristics of effective learning in the early years. So I've looked at playing and exploring, because that's one of the main elements in the early years that we try to make sure happens, is that learning is through and in play and exploration, and that the children are thoroughly engaged in what they're doing, hence the true child-led learning. So finding out, exploring, playing with what they know, but also being willing to have a go at some things they don't know and some things they're unsure of. So when we look at all of this, obviously bear in mind this is to do with physical development and physical activity opportunities. So how are we allowing that to happen in the environments that we've got? Active learning, so giving the children the motivation to learn. If they are active, it has been proven time and time again, particularly with younger children, that the more they are involved actively in something, the more they will concentrate. Keep trying and enjoying achieving what they set out to do, which kind of goes against a lot of things that are happening. I know, just picking on Daniel, because you said at the beginning about Zoom calls in reception, I know from seeing my own two children, my own two daughters, that actually a lot of that has stopped with Zoom calls, because they're sat here, their teacher's on the screen, and I can see particularly my youngest one, who is very creative, sometimes losing the will to live because she can't get up off her seat, she can't move about, and she can't have that interaction as well. And I know we're all trying to make the most of a difficult situation at the moment. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong. Zoom is a way of allowing our children to engage. But when we think of when they're at school with us, and that activity and that motivation that they can have, which you can't necessarily replicate through a Zoom call in the same way as you can when they're physically with you and in front of you. And then finally, creating and thinking critically. So allowing children in the early years to have their own ideas and to make their own links and to choose, rather than being told how something is all of the time or shown how something is. And if we can get these things right in any subject, but particularly in terms of their physical provision, then whatever we do provide for them is going to have a more effective outcome. Okay, so exactly what learning needs to take place, what needs to happen. We've had a look at how children develop in the early years. We've had a look at the characteristics of making that development happen effectively. But we need to think about what learning needs to happen. And I've really just honed in on the link here with a child needing to develop physical literacy. And then I'm sure there's lots of people on the call who know exactly what that is. For anybody who doesn't, being physically active and engaging in things doesn't necessarily lead to being physically literate. So being physically literate is the same as, if you are literate in the true sense of the word, you can read and write, you can go to Tesco's, you can access everything around you because you can read signs, etc., etc. So if you are physically literate, it's the same, but in a physical sense, you can access the world around you because you've got the physical skills to do so. So you can climb stairs, you can walk off a curb without falling off it. They're just little examples. And we try to make sure, particularly in the early years, that children are physically literate, which means fundamental movement skills in essence. I have put a link in. I'm not going to show the video because of time, and I know we haven't got that long, but I'm sure the PowerPoint will be passed to you. It's a very short video clip on what physical literacy is, just a few minutes long if anybody wanted to see that afterwards. But as it says at the bottom, if we don't teach fundamental movement skills between 3 and 7, then children actually may never master the skills that they need. Once they reach the age of 7, there is a greater chance that there'll be a physical developmental delay if they haven't mastered certain fundamental movement skills. And also, as it says, it can take between 240 and 600 minutes to actually master one fundamental movement skill. And the reason that I just put that in is, in essence, that early years, all children really in primary phase, need repetition. So they need the skills, they need to practice them and develop them over and over and in lots of different ways. So these can all be taught through the next 3 elements that we're going to have a look at, which is PE, physical activity, and active learning. So we're now starting to build the picture of, this is what we need our children to be doing, and there are many different ways, but primarily 3 different ways that we can do that. So I've started with the physical education. Just having a look, and I've put those 2 words in bold in terms of, in the true sense of the word PE means physical education, to just again be thought-provoking for us. How are we educating our children physically? And I quite often do this quite a lot when I do consultancy work, when schools have asked me to come in and have a look at their PE provision, is to address that question first. If you can answer that, brilliant. If you're thinking, actually, I'm not really sure, I know I follow a scheme, or I know that I download some things off the internet, can I start to unpick, how am I actually educating the children physically? In the same sense as how are we educating the children numerically when we teach them number skills? So exactly what are we teaching them? Also asking ourselves, what opportunities do we provide rather than what activities do we provide? And I know if there are any newly qualified teachers amongst us, it's honed into us at university that when you're doing lesson planning, it's about starting with a learning intention, not an activity idea, because actually, will that activity idea fulfill what I intend to teach and what I want the children to learn? So what opportunities do we provide to physically educate the children? And that physical education is of their fundamental movement skills. And also, what learning contexts are they in? Are they just opportunities to be active, which under the current circumstances is great, and I don't think any parent would object to a child being physically active. I know lots of people at the moment are sort of crying out for that. I just want my children to go outside and be active. But in terms of a PE lesson, we have the same characteristics of learning that we would in any other lesson. So what are we trying to teach? How will we teach it? And in what context will we teach it through? And then, as again with any other subject, how do we know when to move children on and when to support them? This is a question that I'm asked quite often in terms of, but I don't actually know what a year 3 should look like in terms of their fundamental movement skills. So it's having a bit more knowledge and background towards what that should look like, knowing when a child needs some support and when they need to be challenged a bit more. So I've just put at the bottom, EYFS provision should be based around the progression of fundamental movement skills. And clearly there's a wealth of different ways and opportunities, activities that we can use in order to address that progression of fundamental movement skills. Again, I thought it's very easy for people who have worked through PE and with sport partnerships and what have you to know and recognise instantly what those fundamental movement skills are. But for some of you, it may be something that's quite relatively new, or you've heard of the term quite a lot, but actually what does it look like and what does it mean? So I've just done a quick, I won't read it all out. In essence, fundamental movement skills can be broken down into 3 separate areas. So we have got locomotion, object control and stability as well. So locomotion being any sort of travelling motion, object control being any manipulation of equipment or coordinated use of equipment, and stability being the skills that provide you with balance, as in core stability, spatial awareness, rather than it isn't just balance, being able to balance itself. So we've got those for reference if that was useful for people. And then I've tried to link it in again with the characteristics of effective, not just learning, but fundamental movement skill development. And if our sessions, be them a PE session or a physical development opportunity outside or indoors, or an active learning session, really most of these will be very familiar to everybody in terms of what effective teaching and learning looks like. But I've just tried to put in that slant with fundamental movement skill development. So our provision has got to be high quality, as has our teaching and the learning, in the same way that you would expect that through your literacy teaching or your numeracy teaching, etc. The equipment that we use, as I've just said, it doesn't have to be bought equipment. It can be an array of things in the environment that we can get hold of. The lesson structure and the flow of it, as we know in early years, a lot of it is about seizing the opportunity and being able to go down that child-led learning route, but having an idea as an adult of how we can steer that and scaffold it. But when we are thinking of fundamental movement skill development, the obvious one is that keeping children physically active. So me as a teacher, not spending too long either talking them through things or trying to show or to demonstrate, but actually if we go back to that characteristics of effective learning, it's about me as a teacher providing them with the opportunity to be physically active and to explore and to choose and to question and to etc. All of those effective learning styles. And then I have put progression of skills as well in, because I think it's important that we're lucky in one sense in the EYFS because the physical development is very well mapped out. Or you could compare that to year 1 and 2, where it just says development of fundamental movement skills. So we have got some quite specific physical skills in the EYFS curriculum. But even so, I think as an EYFS practitioner, it's important to know where we want to go. And actually, if a child is stuck with one particular skill, how can we go back a step and help them to progress? And then we've discussed child-led learning already. Okay, so I've just tried to put a sample of some resource ideas. I've started with, because it's EYFS, I've started with Real Foundations, which if people have heard of Real PE from Create Development, is their new resource, and it is specifically just for the foundation stage. I have just put in a few little bits. So there is booking links, there's ideas of what it's about and different timings and what have you, only to facilitate if you were sat there thinking, oh, actually, I'd like to look into that. I know Adam has put things out before from Create Development. This is just one of their newest resources that has come along. Just speaking personally, it is one that I use at Nether Green, and our staff love it for the fact that it is very, very creative, and it does allow a lot of child-led learning. So it's not prescriptive as in this is lesson 1 and 2. You can dip into it. It's very theme-based, and so you don't have to follow a particular script, if you like. So that's one idea. There's obviously lots of dance curriculum ideas. Again, this is just using my knowledge, and I know Adam has put this out before as well. Creative Steps is a scheme of work. So that and the real foundations that I've just showed are more that they are schemes of work that will help teachers and help EYFS practitioners. If you need a starting point, it might be that there's some people out there who think, no, I've got all these ideas in my head and I want to make my own resources out of things. I have previously done my own for the school I used to work in Derbyshire. So it's not necessarily about having to buy into something. And hence why it moves on as well. I've just put there's other resources that are not so much scheme based, but allow you to dip in and out of them. So this one, Move with Zip Active, again, I know has been advertised and put out to the Sheffield schools as well. This, as it says on there, supports children on a physical literacy journey, so it can be linked really well into your PE curriculum in terms of fundamental movement skill development. So they were just a few ideas. They happen to be ones that I use as well, and I always do that because I just think it's so much better if you've used a resource and you actually can see that it's effective and has worked with your children. It's nice to share those ideas. But not forgetting that there is a wealth of free resources online. So there are things like the Premier League Primary Stars. Now more than ever, I think a lot of companies are putting things on for home learning or for support in school with the key workers, children that are in school with us at the moment. So what I tried to do there was just show a quick sample of, yes, there's some things that you can buy into. There's loads of resources online that you can look into as well. But there's also that if you've got the confidence or the ideas, there's having a go at putting some things together yourselves as well, or just dipping into things and seeing what's out there and using parts of things rather than embarking on one full scheme in its entirety. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute, you'll be relieved. Again, I just thought with there being a lot of people on screen, it's quite hard to allow people to talk and share ideas. But in the chat function, if you're sat there thinking, oh, I use such and such at school for our EYFS PE, if you'd like to put some details in, some ideas that you've had or some resources that you use. Adam, sorry again, do you mind reading those out? Is that okay? That's if anybody wants to put anything in. I just, as I said at the beginning, I think it's really nice that there's lots of EYFS practitioners all here, all on one webinar, and there's nobody more creative, I think, than teachers, particularly in the early years. And I just thought it'd be really nice to give you a little bit of time just to think, what do we use, and is it worth sharing with other schools?
Yeah, we've got a couple here. So Real PE at Wyburn, and then a couple of iMoves. So iMoves Dance, and obviously iMoves have got their other schemes of work. There's the Get Set for PE in terms of schemes of work as well. We've seen some where they're doing active stories, and so their PE will be themed around stories. And I guess that's a bit like the Move with Zip Active, where it's a themed for half term. So your theme might be around space, and then all your lessons are space themed, but your activities are all sort of linked into that. Some people said Cosmic Kids Yoga, Real PE. So yeah, a bit of a mix in terms of schemes of work that people are using, and then, like you say, your cosmic kids and things that's in there more of a sort of a break or an intervention, if you will. Squiggle while you wiggle. I didn't think I would ever say that, those words together, but I've not heard of that one. So yeah, that's that. I have to look into that one and see. iMove's Pilates and story-based Pilates and things like that. There's quite a lot, like you say, online at the minute, isn't there? And people sharing resources and things. Go Noodle for brain breaks and things like that as well. Yeah, Go Noodle. There's a couple of those. That's about it for now, I think.
Brilliant,
from people.
thank you. Feel free, if you suddenly have a brainwave or something comes to you, you can, I can't see the chat function because I've got the PowerPoint, but obviously you'd be able to see it as participants. So if anybody wants to keep jotting anything in.
We've done balance bikes as well. Sorry, Kristina. Balanceability and balance bikes in terms of just some of the fundamental movement skills and core skills needed. It's a good one.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So that really sort of sums up and finishes that section on PE when we're thinking about teaching children pure fundamental movement skills. It doesn't, before we go on to the next part, I just wanted to make sure I've sort of made it clear that just because it is a PE lesson in EYFS doesn't mean that there isn't a whole wealth of other learning opportunities going on at the same time. So as we all know, through experiencing a learning intention centered around fundamental movement skills, at the same time, EYFS children would also be learning social skills. They'd also be learning personal skills. They would be being creative. They would be making decisions. There'd be problem solving skills. So when we talk about PE, just to make it clear, obviously PE in EYFS is different to Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So it's just making sure that as practitioners, we are aware that if we are delivering a session which is about fundamental movement skill development, and we're trying to educate the children physically, there will be so many other opportunities as well for different types of learning to take place. Which moves us swiftly on to physical activity. And it's just that slight tweak in terms of the language and the meaning behind it. So physical activity is, the definition, if you like, is any movement, physical movement that uses energy. So it does include PE for obvious reasons, but physical activity is much, much wider than just pure PE, where you are trying to educate the children physically. If you're providing a physical activity opportunity, yes, there will be education, there will be learning happening to it, but actually you're providing an opportunity for a child to be active. And lots of learning will stem off from that, but in essence, the learning intention behind it will be slightly different because it's not PE in inverted commas. And I've just put the little picture image again, just to remind us that it isn't just about teaching a particular skill. It isn't, can you throw and catch this? Can you kick this? Can you move this? Can you balance? It isn't just a skill. It's about the whole link with the whole child in EYFS is about physical development. So as your body moves, your brain grooves, in essence. So any movement for a child in early years and in the primary phase will be having an impact on their whole development, but this is particularly centered around physical development, obviously. So again, what I've tried to just do, because physical activity is so broad, there are so many things out there as well that you could use and you could provide. So I've just tried to break them down here into 5 key areas which we think of when we address physical activity. Some of these have been mentioned already. So in terms of gross motor development, our outdoor area provision in EYFS can cater for that in so many different ways, depending on the environment that you have. So be that if you've got tyres outside, if you've got climbing equipment, if you haven't got any of that, but you might have a big field, hence you can do lots of different fundamental movement skill development. You might just have the playground, in which case the adaptations that you'll have to take in order to make sure that effective learning takes place will be different to if you've got a specified area of physical development provision. But whatever you do have, there are so many opportunities for you to develop a child's gross motor skills. All those fundamental movement skills we talked about before, locomotion, stability and object control can all come in it, as can so many other opportunities for climbing, for travelling fast, slow, all those different things, for using different equipment, be it PE based equipment or things that we find in the natural environment as well. So there's a huge opportunity there. That then takes us into that fine motor development, which the more we can provide for gross motor development, as you saw, is from the inside out. So fine motor skill development is obviously equally important at this phase. Things like do disco, there's so many other things out there, but I wanted to just put one of each, so that again people could be thinking, well, actually if our gross motor provision is really good, but we need to work on fine motor a little bit more. Then there's other opportunities to be active, some of which we've mentioned. So the balance bikes, the top pictures of the Ready Set Ride programme. Again, I was part of that through Adam and the partnership, went on the course, that was brilliant. We asked parents to donate balance bikes, any old ones that their children didn't want anymore. Adam helped us with some of the helmets in the meantime while we built up our own stock. So it's not a case of having to go out there and buy 20 balance bikes. There are ways and means around that as well, but that's a great one for fundamental movement skill development when we're thinking of physical activity. Then there's other ones that tried to include something which addresses creativity. So it doesn't just have to be being active as in going outside to play. So I do something at my school where we have the finger lights, and each children just has one on each finger, and we put music on, we dance to it, and they do a lot of the crossing the midline of the body. They do lots of the rainbow shapes, which is for gross motor development, and then we do some of the finer making shapes with the lines that shine out of the torches, and they love it. So anything like that, again, it doesn't, those finger lights are available on Amazon. They're not very expensive, and we have had hours of fun using those. So they're little ideas for creativity. And again, thanks to Adam, my class love the air drumming. We weren't lucky enough to ask my head teacher if we could buy loads of drumming sticks, so I managed to get some of piping insulation, cut it up into little bits, and my children are going around doing the whole drumming thing, which I only did them as little drumsticks, and they're very soft, so it worked perfectly. And then when I was Googling other ideas, I then saw the picture at the bottom there. I'm not saying we've got that many Pilates balls hanging around, but I've put that in just as sometimes there's resources at school that actually you could turn a bucket and a ball into a drum in that way. So it's just about, as I said before, about trying to think outside of the box a little bit and having a bit more kind of opportunities to be physically active through all of your provision as well. Again, I just wondered if people wanted to put any ideas on in the chat, if there were things, because even more so than the PE, I suppose, in early years. I know how creative people are coming up with different things. And again, don't be worried about putting something on. It might be that, you know, it works in your school and another person might think, oh, it's a shame, but that wouldn't work in our school. We haven't got the facilities. So if anybody wants to put anything on in terms of some ideas that you do for physical activity, I know we've covered some already with things like balance bikes, go noodle, all those things are just opportunities to be active. So I'll just give you a minute or two if anyone wants to share anything.
I've got a couple. General physical activity. We just have some. I've seen some welly stands at schools, and just getting kids to bring Wellington boots in so they can go on the field when they've traditionally just been not allowed to go on the field for whatever reason through most of the academic year. So just getting a welly stand in and having some outdoor shoes for kids to be going out. And I know quite a lot of early years will have those anyway. But yeah, I think that's really good. And then some wobble boards, and sort of I've had and even like just trays with wheels on, and we've seen children doing like hungry hippos and things like that, and using them in PE to slide along the floor on the bodies, and or just in the hall or out in the yard, and scooters and things as well, and just in terms of having some resources and equipment. So yeah, just a couple there from us.
Brilliant, thank you.
We've got some here, loose parts outside. I hope that's not loose parts of the school building that have come off. Gross motor skills, using paintbrushes and water to make big letters on the side of the school building. Yeah, chalks as well was like a lifesaver in lockdown, wasn't it? Lockdown one. Now, when we could actually get outside without it washing off. Yeah, chalks was good. Digging in the mud, yeah. Mud kitchens and stuff like that. We've got half logs, making obstacle courses. Yeah, trim trails and stuff like that. Set up themselves on obstacle courses. Yeah. That's about it, I think, from people for now.
Okay, thank you. Some great ideas, and sometimes it might be harder to think of them when you've just put on the spot. Sometimes it might be things, particularly with physical activity, more so than if you are trying to conduct a PE lesson. It might be very ad hoc ideas, as it often is in the early years. Just a quick example from our school was that our caretaker had just put up the Christmas tree outside. We'd watched him, he decorated it with the lights. The children were loving it. And then when we went outside and did our time in our EYFS area, they talked about wanting to put presents under the tree. So that then sparked a load of different activity ideas, and we then put different things around the playground. So we had ribbons, we had huge bits of cloth, we had empty cardboard boxes, and the children had to run and get different parts that they wanted to then build their Christmas tree. And eventually they'd wrapped cardboard boxes in foil and fabric and all sorts, and put them under the tree. But because we had encouraged different parts, again, it was, the learning was creative. It was obviously the theme of Christmas, but we tried to put the physical slant on it in terms of some of the different skills and activities that we did. We did some balancing, all sorts of different things. So sometimes I know it is very ad hoc as well. Okay, so the last part, I'm conscious of time, nearly done. So just very quickly to move on to, so we've looked at PE, we've looked at physical activity. So I'm just going to finish with active learning and then mental well-being. And again, I've just put a couple of examples. So any learning that you can do, you can generally put an active slant on it. So for example, it might be active learning in maths. These are just literally two that I had done with my children before Christmas. So we played jigsaw pieces. So there were 4 different pieces which joined together with different number problems on them. and the children were split into groups. They had to solve the problem on their jigsaw piece, but then find the other children, the other 3 children who would make that jigsaw complete. Obviously, they were put far and wide in the playground to encourage them to move about. I have done it in the classroom where we've hidden them and they've had to find them, the classic treasure hunt, etc. It's just about finding. What I didn't want to do was give like 10 different ideas, because actually then you've only got those 10. What I wanted to more get across is that any learning that you do with your children, you can think, can I make it active, and just try and put that different slant on it. The same with phonics. Instead of the children all being sat in front of you with the traditional flashcards saying the sound, we often put, it's one of my class's favourites, is alphabet popcorn. So they have a letter themselves. They might be S or they might be T, and they all start squatted down. And when I hold up one of the cards or it flashes on the whiteboard, they have to pop up like popcorn. There's all sorts of different ones for that. So if I say alphabet, they all have to jump up and down, be popping popcorn. We then started just before Christmas doing the CBC, so we were trying to sound out sun by popping up at different levels. So there's different ways that you can always try to put an active slant on any subject area that you're trying to do, any EYFS area that you're trying to address. And again, I've just put a couple of ideas, things that I've dipped into in the past. Super Movers, BBC Super Movers is brilliant for cross-curricular ideas. There are some for younger children as well. They cover number, they cover literacy, phonics, all sorts of different ones. Teach Active do maths and English. Again, they are all different activity ideas, and the Teach Active ones are all linked to specific national curriculum, or in our case, EYFS learning intentions behind them as well. Super Movers is free if you log on. Teach Active is a resource that you would buy into. So there were just a couple of different ideas. Again, just conscious of time, I'm not going to do that part. If people do want to be putting anything in the chat function about active learning, but I think the key to that is it's not necessarily that you have to go and find a resource or find something you know, online that the children can have a look at or follow. Quite often it's just about questioning yourself in your provision, and actually, instead of my children all sat, could I do something where they're a bit more up and about and a bit more active? So then I'm just going to finish with the mental well-being. Referred at the beginning to some of the stats that Adam gave us at the PE coordinator meeting that we had. The one I've put on there was that ordinarily only 47% of children under 16 were meeting those recommended daily amounts of physical activity of the 60 minutes. Anyway, prior to lockdown, it fell during lockdown to 19% of children. And when you think how few children that is actually managing to be active for 1 hour a day, I just think it's quite saddening and quite alarming as well at the same time. But for some families, for very obvious reasons, and it's out of their control. Thinking back to when we take this back into our settings, it's more about trying to think, I know circumstances are difficult at the moment and we've got a lot of restrictions in place, but I know we've had lots of ideas from our sport partnership anyway about how we can adapt our provision, but also this webinar is intended for hopefully not too distant future when things are back to normal and we can partake in a lot of the things we used to do before. So again, I've put a few different ideas from ones that you can buy into, like wellness with Zip Active, which I know has been promoted again through Archers, and then there's other freebies. Somebody's mentioned it already, the Cosmic Kids and the yoga. They are brilliant for anybody who's not been on those. You can access some of those for free as well. And then I've just talked all the way through this about having our own ideas and not necessarily needing a resource. to buy into or to dip into. I do something with my children. We have candlelit stories, not real ones, those ones with batteries that flicker. And we do that on twice a week at the end of the day before they go home. But I've incorporated some of the stretches and yoga moves while I'm reading the story or after the story, depending on what it is. We have all the lights out in the classroom, which is perfect at this time of year at the end of the day. And we have quiet music on and all the candles are all flickering, but we do lots of the yoga stretches and moves as well. So again, sometimes it's just thinking, oh, how could I do something a little bit different that involves the children being active instead of being sedentary. And I just thought I would finish with, we have had amazing support and provision and so many different ideas and resources from the School Sport Partnership. Adam's been amazing at sending us different things. I've tried to dip into different things that I've never seen before, or thought, oh, I think my children will love those, or pass them on to higher up the school if it was for Key Stage 1, with me being at an infant school. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. There is so much stuff out there that you don't need to sit for hours trying to plan things through. Just using the drumming one as an example, I thought, oh, I'll do it with my children. And literally they say to me all the time, can we do the drumming? Can we do the drumming? So sometimes you just catch your children and your class with something that they really, really enjoy. And there's certainly a wealth of things out there that, thanks to Archers, have been, you know, for me as at Nether Green, have been put out there and help it. They're doing the job for us, saving us hours of trawling on the internet. So just to bear in mind that it's not down to you personally. That is what the School Sport Partnerships are there for, is to support you through all of this. So I just thought I would finish by saying sometimes we just need a bit of reflection time for ourselves, and maybe after this call, I know you're probably dying for a cup of tea or something by now, maybe in another quiet time when you've got 2 minutes to yourself, just to think, actually, how can my environment and how can my provision be more active? And maybe just, you might find that useful to jot down a few ideas, or even just start some conversations in the staff room with people, if you're allowed in there, or just a few, you know, thoughts might come into your head while you're cooking tea next, if that's what you're about to do. So I just thought it's important that us as teachers are quite often bombarded with things, and I know I've thrown a lot at you this afternoon, and it's just sometimes thinking, right, I'll give myself 5 minutes just to think, what do I want to change, what do I need to change, and how can I make that happen? Okay. And if anybody does need any further support, any further information, or want to get in touch with me, I just thought I'd finish by putting my email on there. But equally, I know Adam would be pleased to pick anything up if anything came specifically out of today as well. So that's it from me. I'm going to stop talking. You'll all be thankful and relieved. You can go and do what you need to do now. I know that obviously the session has been recorded, but just to say to everybody who is here, thank you for taking part, thank you for listening. And I know if you've been at school, it's really difficult, and even if you've been at home doing several Zoom lessons, I know how it feels. So I do appreciate you taking the time to attend the webinar. So thank you to everybody.
Kristina, we've just had a question about the air drumming thing that you mentioned. What's the name of it?
It came on a link from Adam. I can't remember the actual name. Where it was on our email, it came with a yoga resource, and it was also, do you know the name, Adam?
If I've just put my email in the chat box. If anyone wants to send me it through, they can just ask for anything.
What did you say, Adam?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, go on, say it again.
I've put my email address in the chat box. We've got so I can send some stuff out on resources as well if people need any extra bits and bobs.
Great.
Thank you. Is that all of them?
I think so. Everyone's just
Brilliant.
saying thank you very much.
Okay, thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Good, Kristina,
Thank you.
Keep well, keep safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.